tonight. So we have Askable, who sponsors a customer resource platform that streamlines recruiting, managing, and automating research campaigns. And I can say from having used them personally, they're pretty sweet. What I like about it is their panel. They're really good at community engagement. They have a very engaged panel. We've had really good success with them. So huge thanks to Askable. Also, Pendo is a product analytics software platform, if you haven't heard of them, that helps business understand and guide user behavior with their digital products through insights, in-app messaging, and user feedback. So they also contributed tonight. Thanks to Growth Hoops, that's Lou's consultancy. She's filling up fast. She specializes in product growth and marketing and a ton of product experience as well. So get in quick if you want some consulting. JDP has been a long-time partner with ProductTank. We go back as early as when we started about 7 years ago. As a recruitment company specializing in digital, IT, and creative sectors, dedicated to connecting top digital talent with leading opportunities across Australia and the UK. I wrote that myself, Sam. Yeah, you did. I didn't even get that from your marketing team. That's how well I know you guys. So also want to say huge thanks to Epsilon Retail Media. They're a product company. So their members, formerly known as Citrus Ad, it's a Brisbane success story, having taken their intelligent advertising technology to the world. So hugely grateful to have them part of the community. Also Magentis, the makers of Genie and Gentoo. They're a global health technology company located also here in the precinct. And they focus on empowering intelligent healthcare, providing innovative clinical systems. I also wrote this myself, guys. So yeah, huge thanks to them. And also for the precinct for hosting us and being so flexible with our kind of weird and wonderful seating arrangement. So I want to take a moment to pay respect to Uncle George Khan. He is an elder for Menjiraba or Stradbroke Island. Uncle George is not a descendant of the traditional landowners, but he's been made an honorary elder due to his tireless support of traditional owner causes throughout his lifetime, which is pretty huge. I love how we as a product community are connected with traditional owner causes, either through recruitment with our growing product orgs or just from usage of our product. So yeah, we also want to pay respects to the Turbo people of Meanjin, where our event is based tonight, and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and future. So like I said before, I'm Jace Clamp. I'm one of the organizers here at ProductTank. All of our members, attendees, and people tuning in tonight have one thing in common. We're on a mission to build products people love. Yes. No one wakes up in the morning and says, I want to go build a product people hate. No one does that. But guess what? Guess what? The retort is that doing that is really hard, isn't it? And that's why ProductTank exists, to provide encouraging, supportive community and inspiring content like we're going to have tonight. So with a mix of heartfelt gratitude and thoughtful reflection, I announced that the next event that we have here in Brisbane, I will be attending as a regular member. And this event tonight will be my last as an organizer for ProductTank Brisbane. I know. Thank you. It was about 3 years ago, I actually stepped back from organizing, helping to coordinate 30 cities across Asia Pacific, and now also stepping about a bit in Brisbane so that I can focus more on my next goal, which is to write and speak a bit more on product. If you'd let me reminisce just for a minute about the journey. So going back 7 years, I remember our first event. We did not have a speaker. We didn't have a sponsor. You know, we were using the free venue over there at Fishburners. James Hayes and I, we brought pizza and beer ourselves. We had 30 RSVPs, 10 people showed up. All we had was a discussion topic. Nee was there. Nee, I think Mick, are you around? Yeah, Mick was there. So, and now we've grown. So since then, over 7 years, so over 3,500 members. And I'll say a huge thanks to our organizing team, today. They've been putting on amazing events over the last couple of years, just really smashing it. Brisbane is one of the top 10 most active ProductTank cities globally. So we're very passionate about product. And I've been so grateful for the journey and what lies ahead. You need to do a talk. So if you can hear my voice, you need to do a talk at ProductTank. So we have lots of different formats. We have panels, we have sort of lightning talks, we have sort of main talks. And I want to lead by example, pursuing that goal I spoke of before. What do you do? What's the call to action if you think, oh, I need to do a talk? And you do, because it's really good for your own learning and processing. So what you do is you draw a line in the sand. You say, I'm going to set a date, and this is when I'm going to do my talk. That's step one. So I've set a date for October. I'm going to do a talk on the journey of acquisition through Microsoft. So I work with Clipchamp. So I'll be talking about that in October. And I would love for a few of the people in our community that also have neat stuff to share, big or small, practical or philosophical, to please also get in touch and to do a talk as well. Also get in touch if you want to sponsor an event. We are completely supported. All our events are free, completely supported by our generous sponsors in the community that I mentioned before. So yeah. Product can be hard to define. It's a craft, it's an approach, it's a culture. In terms of helping organizations sanity check, are they doing product? Are they doing politics? Are they doing projects? I can't think of anyone who's done more to help define the craft and provide a reference than Marty Cagan, especially with his release of his recent book, Transform. A favorite quote from the book, Marty, is, the best product teams are not those that simply execute on what they're told. They're teams that are given problems to solve and are empowered to find the best solutions. Can we all put our hands together and give Marty Cagan a warm Brisbane welcome?
Thank you, Jason. 7 years, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? I mean, that's a real service, and thank you, Jason. We started talking together just before the pandemic. We were going to do some visits, but that, of course, was messed up. We all know that. I'm really glad this is my first visit to Brisbane. I've wanted to come here for a while. I do go to Australia, somewhere in Australia, usually Sydney or Melbourne, maybe once a year. So I love that. But when I get a chance, because I have some work locally, if I have an evening or something, I love to do this, get a chance to meet you. I also really, first of all, I should say the community here is already way bigger than I had expected it would be. And I think that's fantastic. You obviously have an incredible place to live. So I thought I'd just share with you a bit about what I've been talking about lately. Honestly, my favorite, more? Oh, yeah. Oh, you should, yeah. Is there a volume for this, anybody? No? All right. All right, yeah, definitely let me know if you're not hearing. Okay. My voice is a little rough. I was talking all day the last couple days, so it's a little raw. So let's talk about this. First of all, why did I honestly didn't even want to write this book. I didn't. That was not the plan. My partners were supposed to write the book. I feel very strongly about the topics in Inspired. It's my favorite kind of topic, is how do product teams do product discovery. That's where innovation. I feel also very strongly about Empowered. That's how do product leaders do their jobs so that product teams can do their jobs. Love that. What happened was, as soon as Inspired came out, there were lots of people all around the world. I mean, I couldn't have been happier how many people read the book, but so many people read the book and said, oh, it sounds so great. Never going to happen here. Just never going to happen. So many people said, you know, you should just see our company. We would just, our leaders, not even close. And that has continued. In fact, it really got quite loud the last few years. So many people believing It's not possible. And we, of course, my partners, I mean, there's only 5 of us. They're very small. But we knew this was nonsense because that's all we do is work with companies that are changing. And so we knew that wasn't the case, but we decided that we really needed an answer to that. And so you may notice if you Transformed is only recently out, but if you've had a chance to see it, it's different than the other ones. It's not giving you techniques to go design a product. It's trying to help you understand how to change your organization. So it's really written starting for the CEO, but really all the senior executives at the company, anybody that's going to be a change agent at a company that wants to change. And my hope is my partners would write that because they were the ones that had been leading major company transformations. My sort of algorithm for picking partners has been very simple. I've known these product leaders for many years, all of them more than a decade, and the ones that had succeeded in transforming major companies to work like the best, I figured it's nothing better than that. A product leader that's been there, done that at a major company. And so I thought they're the perfect ones to write. But what I didn't really think through is they all have young children and were not willing to give a year of their life to write a book. And so they helped, but I gave that year of my life. And so now I have another book. But that was the motivation, is to help. Now, the goal of the book's really 3 things. The first is to really make sure that people understand what does it even mean to work like the best companies. You can't just say work like the best. You have to say what that is. We kind of talk around it with inspired and empowered, but we need to talk specifically. And that's starting with, by the way, we needed a name for this. And I had intentionally avoided labeling this because labeling things is a very painful thing, nomenclature. I always wish we had a different label than product manager. I think it's a horrible title. I've never liked it as a title. I think it's very misleading. But, who wants to climb that hill to try to get people to call it something else? And then what are you going to call it? So we needed something. If you're going to talk about transforming, you have to say you're going to transform to what? So we looked at several companies that we had worked with, and they used the term product operating model or product model. One of them was actually Atlassian. And so we decided just to use that, partly because it's not a process. Let me talk about that. Maybe it is worth pointing out. And we say this, by the way, just for anybody that doesn't read the books, in every book, nothing in any of these books was invented by us. Nothing. All we do is share what we see in the best product companies. That's it. We're really evangelists, curators. We don't share everything we see. If we see a goofy CEO with some personality quirks, we don't talk about those quirks. We talk about the principles at those companies. So we're doing a little bit of curating and evangelizing. Okay. So let's talk about the product model. First of all, it is not a process. That's why we wanted to use something clearly wasn't. It's not a recipe. It's not a framework. It's a conceptual model. I love conceptual models. When we talk about continuous discovery and continuous delivery, that's a conceptual model. It's not a process because there are many discovery processes. There are many delivery processes. Scrum, Kanban, plenty others. It's all about achieving outcomes. Really the highest order goal, and when we talk about moving or transforming, it's moving from output to outcomes. And we'll talk about that because I'm going to talk about the product model at several levels. But the most important point is that I would argue that what is important in product, the most important thing, and this is what we spend so much time coaching people on, is not the processes, none of the sort of, superficial things. It's the product first principles. By our taxonomy, there are 20 product first principles. Now, what's interesting is even if you've worked with Apple, device company primarily, if you've worked with places like Stripe, financial services company, or Amazon, kind of a everything company there, they all, yet all of them embrace all 20 of these principles. So to me, what's important are these principles. Yeah, and just to make sure we're on the same page, like one of the principles, I think one of the most important principles is, if you want to innovate, you'd better deal with experimentation. No lip service on only, and that doesn't mean just running optimizedly or something. We are talking about real experiments. Otherwise, and what's amazing is good companies, that everything is, that's what you see on the inside is all these experiments. Of course, from the outside, we just see the results. But on the inside, it's like one experiment after another. Yet, if you go to most companies, no experiments, no meaningful experiments. Yes, they all have marketing kinds of people doing funnel stuff. That's not experiments. All right. So I do think it's very important to realize there is no one right way of doing product. There are many good ways of doing product. To me, it's those principles. All right. So just to make sure, because I have used different language for years, I've been writing about this stuff for 20 years, and it's only recently trying to sort of formalize and nail this down, but I just want to make sure you understand what I've been referring to. For a long time in my writing, it was from the rest to the best. From moving from project-based work to product-based work, right? I love this one, by the way. I still use it with CEOs and CFOs a lot. Moving from a time-to-market focus to a time-to-money focus. And of course, whenever you say something like this, it doesn't mean like moving from projects to products. We still do projects, but the point is a product. Just like we still care about time to market, but the real point is time to money. Whoops. Feature teams to empowered product teams. A lot of people use that language. And then from output to outcomes, which is the one I'm trying to really focus on. So at the highest level, that's what we're talking about. Output to outcomes. Output, projects and features. What we're trying to do, achieve outcomes. By the way, just on that topic, literally, not even 24 hours ago, one of my favorite thinkers in product, a guy named Mike Fisher. For those of you on the engineering side, he writes a very popular engineering blog called Fish Food for Thought. His name is Mike Fisher. And he just did this article because he's actually a PhD in business, among many other accomplishments, longtime CTO. He was the longtime CTO of Etsy. Many of you know Etsy, one of my favorite companies. And now he, by the way, is the CEO of MyFitnessPal. Some of you know that. So he wrote this article, just a research-based article showing the data, why those famous sort of CEO that drives a roadmap, why it so consistently fails. So if you want the data argument for that, that's what he's sharing. So I'd encourage you to look at that. All right, so let's double click on this. Let's try to give a good summary of what it really means to move to outcomes. Because honestly, it's very easy to say move from output to outcomes. It's a lot harder to do that. So let's talk about it. Now, I want to preface this. If I was to go into your company, the first thing we'd do is try to figure out where you are right now before we'd even get into this. Because you kind of need to know the from if you want to talk about transforming to the to. So you all know your from. You know where your company is and how it works. I don't. So let me talk. What I'm going to describe is very close to what you do, in which case, good on you, as you say. I love that. But if not, that's when transformation becomes interesting. It's interesting too, because yesterday I was in Sydney and talking to some great groups like this, and one of the things everybody always asks is, like, how is Australia different than other parts of the world? And honestly, there are places in the world that are noticeably, significantly different, but I do not see that in Australia. And that doesn't mean that all are good or all are bad. It means that just like the rest of the world, by the way, just like San Francisco, there are great product companies working very much like I'm talking about, and companies that look like they're coming from a different era. That's true in San Francisco, it's true in Sydney. I was with Canva yesterday. Canva is awesome. And they're right. And just the day before, I was with some other companies which have a whole lot of work to do to start working like Canva. And that is totally normal. That's my point. It's that distribution exists everywhere. So it's not about where you are. It's about how you're going to work. So then let's talk about that. When I talk about, and this is just the taxonomy or the mental model, the conceptual model that we use to look at an overall product organization. How does a company create the products that serve their customers? And I could really talk, there's 3 dimensions. I could talk about them in any order. I'm actually in the book, it describes them in one order. I'm going to describe it here in the opposite order. It doesn't really matter which one you do. In the book, I described it the way most people work on it. They start from the bottom and work up. But when I talk live to a group, I like to kind of explain it in the other order, because this is more logically how you'll think about it. From your CEO's level, the first thing every company, and I don't mean not just talking digital, any company, anybody who wants to power by technology, the first question we have to talk about is, how do you decide what to work on? Every company does something. Everybody does. You always have many, many opportunities. You always have many threats. And the idea is you have to make choices. Now, most companies, the bigger you get, the more formal what I'm about to describe usually is. But there's some form of quarterly or at least annual planning process. You might be getting ready for the next quarter round right now. And in that process, a lot of different parts of the business are making their case. They're often literally business cases. They're saying, this is what I think we should do. And they put together a case that says, if we build this, we think we can make this much money. Everybody does something like this. It's just about how formal you want to make it. And the result of that is a set of things that we want to do, which usually go directly to roadmaps, to the relevant teams. There's nothing magical about that. Now, in most companies, what's going on is that they have all these different, resources, people, and they're trying to meet the needs of all these different business units. So the most common form of this planning is that the CEO and the CFO kind of do some kind of allocation where they say, this business unit, the commercial banking business unit gets 10% of our resources. And the consumer banking gets 20% of our resources. And the platform team gets this. And then each of those leaders drives the features, buys the features that they want. Pretty common. In good product companies, it's not like that. In fact, this is really the topic of product strategy. And this is one that a lot of people are surprised about, because in good product companies, this is probably the most impactful of the 3 things. It's also the most difficult politically. And that's why we usually recommend, just little lessons learned, we usually recommend doing the first 2 first, or the other 2 first, and earning the trust of the leaders of the company before you tackle this one. But if you want to know like why a company like Stripe runs circles around these much larger financial institutions, they do everything we're going to talk about here well, but they do this really well. And this is the holistic view of product strategy. This is looking at the most important opportunities, looking at the most serious threats, and making bets on those. Now, it's the reason we talk about bets, good product companies talk about bets, is because they know they can't be sure which ones are going to pan out. This is one of the huge problems in the corporate planning processes of most companies. They, in their mind, if the spreadsheet looks good and convinces them, they hope for those results, no matter that it almost never happens. According to Mike Fisher, about 85% of the time, it does not happen. But they don't know any better. They don't have an alternative. But the first is to change how you decide which problems to solve, which opportunities to pursue. We use the language of problems to solve, right? Some people like jobs to be done. Some people, like if you're Netflix, you don't necessarily frame it as a problem to solve or a job to be done. You frame it as entertainment. But it's the same thing. Hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, that's the first dimension. The second dimension is changing how you solve those problems. Now, the truth is this is more than a change. This is product discovery right here. This is what we're talking about, product discovery. In most companies that are not yet moved to this model, they're not doing product discovery at all. It's not a purist statement. I'm just saying they are given a roadmap of features and projects. The details aren't fleshed out, of course. That's still to come, but they already know the solution they want. Very often, like in enterprise software companies, they will literally point to competitors' features and say, we want that feature. It's parity. It's called the feature parity strategy. So the team still has to figure it out, but that's not product discovery. All they're doing is designing and building the feature that the stakeholder or the CEO said they want. Now, if you're moving to this model, this is a completely new game. And most importantly, this is where the new competencies come in. So when we talk about the need for a product manager, of course, we have to be clear because there's a lot of kinds of product managers out there. But just to be clear, if you are a feature team, the person product manager has a completely different job and responsibility than the person on this kind of team that is trying to be a product manager. And I want to double click on that because the truth is the product teams have product managers, designers, engineers like you'd expect, and they all have managers, but the designers and the engineers, the job is not all that different. It's basically what they were taught in school. However, they're able to kind of do it more first class. They're not, for example, a designer is right front and center. They're not just building a solution that you'll often hear designers on feature teams complain about. They're just there to put lipstick on the pig, right? It's already a dumb feature, and all they're doing is putting the company, style guide on it. That's it, and that's not really design. So what in this case they're there to help design the solution. So in product discovery, it's a very different job. Instead of being given a feature or a project to build on a roadmap, you're given a problem to solve. And when we say problem to solve, there is like, okay, let's say onboarding takes our customers 3 weeks on average. We're in a scale-up situation, that's got to get better. Right now, the key result, the outcome is it's 3 weeks on average for a new customer to be up and running. And what we need to do is bring that down. Let's say the leader says we need to get it down under a day. Ideally under, almost automated completely, but at least under a day. All right, that's the outcome we're trying to get. Now that's an outcome. You either get that or not, but that's an outcome. Now, the team is given a problem to solve and a goal to achieve. You might recognize this is what OKRs were actually invented for. What I just said, that's what Andy Grove created them for. That's not how most people use them because it's been bastardized, all over the world for feature teams, but it's not for that. That's why it doesn't really fit for these feature teams. But for product teams, you're given an objective, which is the problem to solve, and the key result, which is the measure of success. Okay. In order to solve that problem, this is what it means to be an empowered team. The team gets to figure out the best solution. The way we talk about that is it's a solution that's valuable. The customer will buy it or choose to use it. It's usable. They can figure out how to use it. It's feasible with the tech stack, with the skills, with the time we have. We can build it. And it's viable. Viable means that it works for our business. That's actually a very, very hard one. It includes it's marketable. We can afford to market it. We have the technology to market it. We can sell it. We can service it. It's legal. We can fund it. We can monetize it. It's compliant. It respects privacy rules. This is what it means to be viable. Now, we know what the designer is responsible for. It's not a mystery. They make sure that this thing has a great experience, which includes usability. We know the engineers are responsible for the feasibility and delivering this thing. But this is why we actually need product managers, because the other two risks are value, customer, that's value to the customer, and viability to our business. Imagine if you don't have that person with those skills. How is the designer and engineers going to make the decisions on that solution? The alternative that's done when you don't have a product manager is a project manager type person calls a meeting with all the stakeholders. They literally invite sales, invite marketing, invite legal, and they all argue it out, which is unfortunately designed by committee. That's not what we want to do. So this is why we need a product manager. This is why, and you might know, what does that have to do with a product owner role? Product owner is a delivery responsibility. Product manager is a discovery responsibility. Yes, product manager should also be the product owner. But I've talked to a lot of product owners that cover it. On average, it's about 10% of their time. Now, that might surprise you, but the main reason for that is when you work the way we're talking about with continuous discovery and delivery, it dramatically reduces the delivery work for the product manager. So it's about 10%. It's not the job. The heart of the job is discovery. Just like for the engineers, it's the reverse. The heart of the job for them is delivery, building, testing, shipping. Yet they participate in discovery every single day, about 10% of their time. So it's a fundamentally different job. I make a big deal over this because I'll be honest, the biggest reason I make such a big deal over this is because the single most common reason that companies fail on transforming is because they don't take this role seriously. The most common issue of this is they just retitle. They declare their product owners now to be product managers. Or they declare their business analysts to be product managers. Now, don't get me wrong, thousands of business owners, business analysts, and product owners have been retrained to be product managers. Many. Now, a lot of them decide they don't want to. That's a different issue. That's fine. But it is most people, if they want to, and if they have somebody that cares enough about their career to coach them, can transition. But one way or another, if you set up an empowered product team, and you probably have capable designer and capable engineers, but if you do not have a capable product manager, you have just set that team up to fail. Specifically, what you're going to see is the stakeholders will go to the CEO and say, there's no way I'm trusting that person. They have no clue about our business. This is why this is sort of the biggest obstacle for so many companies. The thing that drives me nuts the most is that it only takes a few months to raise somebody to the level they need to be. The onboarding process for a product manager is about 3 months. It's worth pointing out what happens there. They have to really become an expert on your users and customers. How many product owners do you know that actually spend time every week with real users and customers? It's not even part of not going to happen. Another is they go deep on the product data. They typically start their day with about an hour in the data tools, the user analytics tools, the sales analytics tools, the data warehouse tools, so they really understand the latest of the various experiments that are running and what they need to change. They also, and this is really the hardest part about that onboarding, they have to learn the different dimensions of their business. I mean, my situation, some of you may know, but I wrote a little bit about this in the book Inspired, but I was an engineer for 10 years and I wanted to learn product. And the person coaching me, the first thing he did was assess me. He realized that I had missing most of product management skills. I had some technical background, of course, for several years building things, but literally, I didn't know our customers. And that was an interesting one because I was going to be the product manager for a product building tools for developers. And my argument to him was, I am the customer, right? Developer, if I know anything, I know like develop. And he said, all I know is that's never true. And he was right. In fact, he right there, because he needed to change my thinking, he said, look, you're not allowed to make a single decision for your product team until after you have visited his rules, not mine, 30 customers, 15 in the US, 15 in Europe. It was a 3-week business trip that he arranged, and I visited 30 customers, and within the first few days, my world was completely rocked. Because I realized that our customers were nothing like our developers. We were in this crazy little Silicon Valley bubble. Our customers were Walmart in Arkansas and FedEx in Memphis and just all these places that you couldn't be further away from Silicon Valley. And he was right. Second, he asked me questions about the financials of the product. Not only did I have no idea, I didn't even know what the KPIs stood for. I remember he asked me a series of questions and I got one right. And it was even then partial credit. He said, do you know what LTV was? And I knew somehow, I don't even know how I knew, but it was lifetime value. And he was surprised that I knew that. He said, great, how is that calculated for your product? I had no clue, of course. I didn't know if that meant for a month, a year, who knows? I didn't know. And he realized I knew nothing about the financial analytics side, nothing. How could you be a product manager, of course, and not know that? So he said, look, it's going to be some work. I'm going to send you a book on basic finance. I'm embarrassed to say this, but it's just true. I studied computer science. I had 0 courses in business, 0 courses in finance. I wish somebody had told me to take some kind of finance class. That would have saved a lot of grief, but I didn't. And so he sends me a book, which he said, and he was right, it's kind of boring, but it's not that hard. Make your way through the book. But the more important thing was he introduced me to a person in the finance department I was at HP Labs, the division I was in, and this person agreed to tutor me. Twice a week, we had lunch together in the cafeteria, and he came with a set of analytics. And he said, all right, today we're going to talk about these analytics, the sales cycle. We're going to talk about that. And he would explain what each measure was, what each metric really meant. And most importantly, to me, I didn't even know when he would describe something like a customer acquisition cost, what was good, what was bad. I had no idea. I remember the biggest shock was I didn't even realize that the product I had been working on was losing money. It was losing money. He was so shocked that I didn't know that. And I remember going back to the rest of the team, the other developers, do you know that we were losing money? None of us knew. We were so in the dark. We were just working we were happy, developing. We had no idea. The person who was product manager before felt their job was to shelter us from all that unpleasantness. Like angry customers and the actual situation. I mean, I couldn't believe that. And so he then explained it's not that unusual with new products to lose money, but you certainly should know that you're losing money. And it was like, and so what the executives are looking for is they want to know you have a path to profitability. So that's what we have to work on. I mean, the truth is, if he hadn't tutored me, if the coach hadn't coached me, I would have had the world's shortest career in product. Because like most companies, every quarter they'd have these executive reviews. QBRs, whatever you call them. We call them executive reviews. And he told me before my first that they weren't really reviewing the product. They were reviewing me, the product manager. Because they're like, yeah, we're not going to micromanage this. If the product manager doesn't know what they're doing, then it's almost certainly going to be wasted effort. So, and thank goodness, because I was prepared for that first review. I had prepared. He had prepared me. I had answers to their questions. And otherwise I wouldn't. I remember thinking during that first review, if he hadn't have trained me on this, I would have known none of this. So anyway, also, by the way, I cut my inexperience short. I also didn't know go-to-market. HP had a very, and still does actually, a very specific go-to-market channel of direct sales and channel sales, and you have to know how that works. You have to know where value has to be provided. That was part of my sales calls. The customer calls was learning about the field organization. All of that happened in 3 months, less than 3 months. And I was coming from about as bad a base as you can come. I mean, it's pretty basic. Most people you hire into a product management role, or at least most people that I do, have more to start with than I had. The advantage I had is I wanted to learn it, and I had somebody that actually cared. So I spent a few minutes on that, but without that piece on your team, it's like a house of cards and it falls down. So it's critical. And that's why I spend so much time trying to get people to think differently about the product management role. Because I don't want, if you do work on an empowered product team, I don't want you to fail. Now, the main thing I try to tell people to do is that if you're on a feature team, the job is essentially project management. There's nothing wrong with project management. It is very helpful. Work. It's a very time-consuming role. And if you're an empowered product team, product manager, you either have to decide if you're going to work crazy hours because you're going to do the product management at one part of the day and the project management stuff later, or if you're going to offload the project management to a project manager so that you as product manager can focus on what we just talked about, the value and viability of the solutions. I want to be clear because there's so much nonsense out there, and I'm not talking about Australia, I mean worldwide, and especially social media. It's probably the worst possible place to learn product. It's just, you're incredibly lucky if you get good stuff. And how would most people know? In fact, the people that need it the most know the least on what to look for. They're so vulnerable. Yeah. You just want to make sure there are some really great sources. Teresa Torres is fantastic. Shreyash Doshi is fantastic. So there are some good sources, but it's very hard for people to find this stuff. But anyway, I make such a big deal about this because I just want to make sure that you are, if nothing else, have what you need to succeed. I also understand, and this does bother me, a lot of people are feature team product managers and they found themselves in this situation. They realize they're essentially project managers and they're very unhappy in their job, and that makes me sad. So I am hoping, obviously, more companies transform. We'll talk more about what you can do in a bit. But this is the second big issue, changing how you solve problems. This is product discovery. This is the core job for product managers and product designers. Oh, the other point I wanted to make is that this is not, in a feature team, the skills that are prized are things like communication, coordination, good status reports, stuff like that. In the empowered product team, it's a creator. You are literally shaping product right next to the designer and the tech leads. You are shaping the product. You're not actually coding. You're not actually creating comps or wireframes. You are shaping the product through the customer value and the business constraints. That's a big responsibility. So you need to think of yourself as a builder. You're not a manager. You're not a coordinator. And I'm definitely getting to the age where if I hear anybody else say the job of a product manager is to explain why, I think I'm going to explode. That takes about 15 seconds in a week. And furthermore, it's covered in the product strategy. So the product manager doesn't even need to do that. So the herd the cats. Yeah, that's project management. And that's what it feels like. There's some amount of that we all do, but the point is you need to make sure you're doing your real job, which is to shape that product. If you can do that and you still want to herd the cats, more power to you. But your job, what you're evaluated on, is the outcome, which is not about herding the cats. It's about shaping a successful product. Okay, the last one, and honestly, this one's very frustrating because I can't believe we're in 2024 and still need to talk about this. 20 years ago, most companies that I know moved to Agile. And the reason they moved to Agile was for this. Because there's basically a couple things that matter. We need small, frequent, reliable releases. We need to be able to take care of our customers. If there's an issue, we need to be able to address it. And, for quite a few years, the world moved to that. Then the process people took over is what happened. Now, the majority of the world is back to doing monthly or quarterly releases. A lot of companies never actually got there, of course, but monthly or quarterly. You cannot take care of your customers if that's what you're doing. Furthermore, there's that whole dimension of taking care of your customers. But the other whole dimension is we need to prove outcomes. How do you prove outcomes if you don't have instrumentation for everything you release so that you can show in, say, for example, with an A/B test, that your new capability is solving that problem? So it's critical that we have modern infrastructure. For most companies that are serious today, that's continuous deployment. Now, if you're doing quarterly releases, and you may know there's processes, I'm trying not to curse, there's processes like SAFe that do quarterly or 10-week releases. That's a non-starter in the product world, non-starter. But at a minimum, you need to get to every 2 weeks. Now, that's nothing to brag about, every 2 weeks. But if you're not releasing once every 2 weeks, and I mean each team, not the organization, each product team releasing, you should be releasing uncoupled and independently, but at least every 2 weeks, then okay, you can get to work on the other stuff. But hopefully you can get yourself to continuous deployment. Hopefully everybody here knows this, but there's 20 years of data at all the best companies. It's all documented in that book, Accelerate. 20 years of data that shows you get better speed and better quality by releasing constantly. So it's counterintuitive, of course, but it's a little bit of math. It's not hard math, but you can see that why companies do that. I don't want to, it bothers me to waste time on this topic, but look at all these companies still releasing monthly or quarterly. So it's just like, what are they thinking? All right. Those are the three areas: changing how you decide what problems to solve, changing how you solve those problems, and then changing how you build, test, and deploy your solutions. Okay. There are some concepts and competencies. I'll be very quick on this so that we can get to some questions. We talked about the product manager a lot. Product designer, yeah. Now, of course, we're not talking about API products. Sometimes they do have product designers. I love that. But for the most part, in an API platform product, it's a product manager and the engineering tech lead. But if a product has an experience, then they usually do have a product designer. And then an engineering tech lead. You know, we don't need all our engineers to be deeply involved in discovery. We need at least the tech lead. And I hope, this is another thing I'm really sad to have to talk about today or in 2024. If your company is outsourcing your engineers, you need to get serious. That is just a non-starter. And if your company doesn't understand why that's a non-starter, they need to, like, right at the basics. You know, the truth is, if I had to choose, if you sort of made it so I could only pick one of those three core competencies, it would be the tech lead. That is the most important key. You know, it is not a coincidence that the vast majority of innovations out there, they first of all came from companies working like this, but more than that, they came from the engineers. And yet, look at how most companies work. The executives are making the roadmap and the engineers are not even in the room. Sometimes they're not even in the country, right? They're like, yeah, they're basically order takers. And what we need is the opposite. There's a great Steve Jobs quote: we don't hire all these engineers to tell them what to build. We hire these engineers so they can show us what's possible. It's so fundamental, but of all the differences I see between great product companies and the rest, this is at the top of the list and the most obvious. You can tell this in the first few minutes of going inside a company. Where are the engineers? Are they there in the room, at the table, when you are making product decisions? Or is the first time they see anything at sprint planning? In which case, you know you've got big problems. All right. And of course, product leaders, that's referring to the managers of product management, product design, and engineering. And they are key to all this. In fact, they're the ones we hold accountable for leading a company to this way of working. They are the key. That's what I want to talk about in a minute. These are the main concepts. We've talked enough, I think, about these concepts. Product teams really are the core of everything. And you could argue that everything I'm talking about is either part of a product team or to nurture a product team. Product strategy is how product teams get the right things to work on. Product discovery is how they work on those things. And product delivery is how they build and deliver those. And product culture gets to things like, how do we make decisions? Or here's a good example of culture. At Spotify, another really good product company for many, many years, competing against top-tier companies and holding their own. At Spotify, on the walls, they have a sign which is 100% predictability equals 0% innovation. They're reminding everybody of this principle. This is a cultural principle. And that sounds like, here's the thing you have to realize. We care about predictability and we care about innovation. But I mean, a lot of people ask me, how in the world could that horrible process called SAFe be spread so far? Easy. First of all, it's smart marketing. They call it Agile even though it has nothing to do with Agile. I mean, zero to do with Agile. However, what it really is, it's a process around predictability. It's waterfall. That's what it's for. It's very good at predictability. It's optimized for that. Waterfall has always been optimized for that. That's the first processes I learned. And most people very quickly figure out how to make predictable dates. You just are compromising the outcome. It's not about the outcome. It's about shipping something on time. So that's why. So that's an example of a cultural principle to say, look, we realize that we care about predictability and we care about innovation, but if push comes to shove, we're focused on the outcome. That's what's most important. In fact, we have a technique that is important to remind everybody of, because just because you focus or prioritize innovation doesn't mean you don't sometimes need a real date. And that's called a high integrity commitment. That is how we make a serious promise for a date of a real outcome, not just a deliverable. Okay. I know this is sort of an eye chart. One of the product coaches in Europe actually did this and let me use it. But it's all 20 of the product principles that we spell out. That's the first half of the book, Transformed. I'm not trying to go through them with you, but we've talked about a lot of these things, like focusing on outcomes over output and placing bets in a product strategy. And of course, embracing rapid experimentation. Big difference, by the way, with a startup versus, we don't even talk about transformation when it's a startup. Because when it's a startup, it's still being born. You can set things up in a few days to work this way. It's so much easier than in a bigger company. We reserve the term transformation for a medium to large company where it's a much more complicated situation. But one of the things a big company has to worry about is you already have revenue, you already have reputation, you already have responsibility. So when we test our ideas, we can be much more aggressive at a startup than at an established company. We have techniques in discovery. Inspired talks about this. We have the techniques to test those ideas responsibly, like in a regulated industry. In terms of delivery, we talked about A/B testing, we talked about monitoring, instrumentation, small frequent releases, continuous delivery, and then the cultural ones I talked about, innovation over predictability. One I should talk about is this, especially problem in Europe. I haven't seen it as a big problem here or in most of the US, but the addiction to process. And it is, it's not so much maybe cultural here, but there can be individual leaders that are very addicted to process. And this is a serious addiction because it's not about process. I hate to actually quote Elon Musk anymore because he's he's over the deep end, but he is right about this. He likes to say the problem in big companies is process is used as a substitute for thinking. And it's too true. All of the leaders worry about this. Bezos constantly worries about this, process taking over. So it's not that we don't have process. Everybody has some kind of process, but the point is process is not the point. The principles, these principles are the point. So if you look at these principles, pick your company or pick your favorite company. My argument is these are the things you will find in the good companies. And I hope they're the things that's in your companies. If they're not, to me, what it really means to transform is to adopt these principles. Now, these principles look very differently in practice if you're building a device versus if you're building a cloud service versus you're building a consumer app. They can look very different. But the principles are still there. And I would encourage you, whether you read the book or not, I'd encourage you to think hard about each of those principles. And I have yet. In fact, all the reviews, with all my books, there is an unbelievably extensive review process. And anyway, I was looking, does anybody not believe that any of these are critical? I want to know if you think these aren't critical, and we believe they are, and that you will find them in good companies. They just show differently, and they should. All right. There's another dimension to this discussion. The overall point of an empowered team is to push decisions down to the team. The rationale is pretty simple, like as stated by Reed Hastings, the co-founder of Netflix. The reason we have empowered teams is so that we can push decisions down to the people closest to the technology, the enabling technology, and closest to the users. So that's sort of the logical place to make these decisions. And that's straightforward, but there is a catch. The catch is that the team needs this context. They need to understand the big picture if they're going to make good choices. In fact, one of the things as leader he's always trying to do is identify pieces of the context that he hasn't shared. Because that's usually the source of a bad decision somewhere. What is that context? What's the goal of the company, the objectives of the company? That's pretty straightforward. The product vision. By the way, most companies that haven't transformed, they really don't have a product vision. They might have a mission statement, they don't have a product vision. These are one of my favorite things. Team topology, one of the toughest things. Excuse me. Team topology is how we slice up the work into product teams so that each team owns something meaningful. Product strategy, of course, is the main thing. It's the living thing. It's the part that describes, I should have said this. On product vision, and I love that topic. We could talk for just an hour on vision. But vision is all about how you're going to make your customers' lives better. That's the most important thing to keep in mind. It's how are you going to improve their lives. Product strategy is how you're going to make money and pay the bills this quarter. So this is a very different lens. A lot of people send me their product vision to review, and I'm like, that's just how you're going to make money. And it only works if you actually do something for customers. But they don't talk about that. They're really trying to articulate their strategy. And of course, on a practical level, the point of a product strategy and why we update it every quarter is it identifies the most important problems to solve this quarter. And those problems to solve are assigned to the product teams, the relevant product teams. Most of us, but you don't have to, use the OKR technique because that's what it's for. We don't use OKRs for individual objectives. You can, but it's silly. OKRs are designed for product teams. Problem to solve, key result. All right, that's the strategic context. One of the other parts of the book that we wanted to do is we wanted to give lots of examples of companies that are not Silicon Valley native companies. Or like a Canva. Canva didn't have to transform. They started this way. They're a great example of serious leaders that knew what they were doing. The harder question is, the biggest banks in Australia, can they move to this way of working? Because they are way before these techniques were established. So what we did is, and by the way, and I encourage people to do this, a lot of people have told me this is their favorite part of the book because it's all the real names. People are looking them up on LinkedIn. They're reaching out to them. They're talking about them. And every one of them, almost safer. To me, they're kind of a personal favorite because I had no idea until I met the head of product and head of technology. They're Saudi. They're a Saudi Arabian company. This is not a tech hub. And they ended up doing an amazing transformation to save their company, which was a travel agency company, from the two big American travel OTAs taking their business. And today they dominate their market. I love that. Kaiser is actually in the US, the biggest 12 million people healthcare provider and insurance provider. And regulated industry, very difficult. What they've been able to do is incredibly impressive. CarMax is the largest used car sales company in the US. on the eastern side of the US. Gympass is the first unicorn out of Brazil in the fitness tech space. Trainline, some of you may know Trainline. You do a trip to the UK, Northern Europe. They are a huge turnaround story. They became the UK's most successful IPO to date. They're fabulous. In the UK, Monday to Friday, their app in the App Store is rated high, #1 travel app, higher than Uber. That's an amazing story. The Guardian's 202-year-old company. Here, thankfully, because they got serious about this. DataSite, an enterprise SaaS company based in the Midwest, Minnesota, not a tech hub, let me just say that. And completely turned around. Today have 94% market share in the merger and acquisition software tech space. Just amazing. And by the way, some of you have worked at a sales-driven company. You know how hard that is. That was 100% sales-driven. These are the stories you can see. And our hope was if we give all these stories, people won't say, oh, but it doesn't work, in our country, or it doesn't work for a regulated industry. Or people still make stuff up. But anyway, the truth is, if you're looking for an excuse not to do this stuff, it's easy to find. So you won't have trouble to find some excuse not to do it. But if you do want to do this, I hope you do. There's one other part of the book I should mention that I think is important, because you already know none of these are easy. None of these transformations are easy. And often the difference is because everybody has objections. I'm not even talking about people who just don't like change. That's humans. There's a percentage that just don't like change. But I'm talking about the CFO that says, I don't understand how we're supposed to fund this stuff. We're used to funding projects. What's the alternative? Or the marketing person that says, I don't understand how we're supposed to release constantly. We're used to doing press releases every quarter, or something like that. You need to have answers to these objections. And so we had been collecting these objections for years, and we put them all together in the last section of the book. Objections from every major stakeholder, from the CEO, from the board, from the actual product teams themselves. Some of the objections come from your own people, from all these different areas, sales, from customers, and how we address those. And many people have told me that was the ammunition they need to really give a good answer to their leaders. The last thing I wanted to say on this, was one of the things transformation is not about learning the techniques. It's really not. It's about winning hearts and minds. It really is. And it starts winning the hearts and minds of your teams, of course, but hopefully that's usually pretty easy, because most of the time, most of your teams this is what they've wanted to do forever. They're not usually the problem. Problem is stakeholders, executives in your company. They're used to working a certain way, the devil they know versus the devil they don't, and they don't trust you enough, especially if you have a long history of making promises that you don't deliver on, which is unfortunately the standard practice with Agile. They cannot give you a good date that you can count on. And the business needs that. So they just lose confidence. So much about this is reestablishing trust. And the way it works is it's gradual. You're not going to get the CEO to say all of a sudden, all right, I'm going to grant everybody permission to do all this. Doesn't work that way. The CEO will probably say, I am willing to let one or a small number of pilot teams work this way for a quarter or two, and let's see if it delivers the results. If it does, I would love to talk about maybe expanding that to a few more teams. And if that works well, we can talk about the business unit. And if that works well, we can talk about other business units. It works like that. And really, is it right to ask for anything more than that? I don't think so. I think that's fair. especially when there's a long history of frustration. So that's what we're trying to do, is win those hearts and minds. If you're a product leader here, this is primarily on you. This is your job as a product leader. This is why you've been hired. The CEO may not use these words, but this is the role. If you're an individual contributor, you are not going to be able to like go have lunch with the CEO probably and talk about this whole transformation. But what you can do is raise your own game, and I promise you that will be recognized. I always encourage people, if they're a product owner, and I tell them honestly that I would be nervous right now if you're a product owner. With generative AI, with the cost of funds in the world, with the economy in the world, that's vulnerable. I want you to be as protected as possible. Raise your skills. Even if you stay as a product owner, you'll be more skilled. Raise that skill. Try to raise yourself to a true product manager like we're talking about. At a minimum, I promise you'll be more valuable to your company, and almost always that will be recognized. Somebody will notice this person knows a lot about our business, they know a lot about the data, and they know a lot about our customers. That's incredibly useful. And then if you can get your team to get excited about this too, you can start showing people what you're capable of. I probably went over, didn't I? Am I all right on time? I can't. But well, you're not going to chase me off right now. All right. Because there's one other thing that I've been thinking I found is really important. And honestly, what I'm about to say is very political. But in one level, that's what transformation is. It's dealing with this politics. So let's lean in for a second. When we talk about product discovery, so the first political thing I already mentioned, which is don't tackle the product strategy topic until you've first demonstrated that you're awesome at solving hard problems and delivering outcomes. So that's the product discovery topic. In other words, and of course, if you don't do the product delivery stuff, you can't do really anything, right? If you can't deliver, can't do much. So I'm assuming the minimum is you're going to work on the delivery things if you need to. I hope you don't. I hope you're already there. But if you need to, you'll work on that, and you'll work on the discovery skills, which we can usually do those two in parallel. But even then, so now you're going to have a team and you're going to work on solving hard problems in ways your customers love and work for your business. Chances are your designer, your engineers are going to be very excited about this. But this is where we need to be a little smart. Product discovery is really two parts: problem discovery and solution discovery. We don't usually separate them like that, but they are, right? And in other words, a product team, a strong, empowered product team, is more than capable of going out and doing user research and finding some really good problems to solve. You may know that's fun. I love doing that. Don't do that. I would suggest you not do that. The reason for that is because your stakeholders have already been doing this probably for years. And they will have very strong opinions of the top problems that need to be solved. They're already expressing their opinions of those top problems by giving you their best guess with a solution, which is called the roadmap. So they're already used to driving the problems to be solved. They don't always have the language, of course, but they feel, because remember, they're trying to run their part of the business, and usually they are very wise as to the problems. Now, they might not have the same prioritization of those problems that we would if we went and did the user research fresh. But let me just put yourselves in the shoes of your stakeholder, key executive that you would be doing this sort of with. The product team says we need 3 weeks or more to go do user research to validate these problems. They're like, seriously? We know this. We've been doing this forever. we know this. Well, you're just going to go 3 weeks. You're going to come back and say what we already know, which is, by the way, usually happens. They get really frustrated. Instead, what I encourage teams to do is, just like you're asking the stakeholders to trust you a little bit, that you can come up with a good solution to the problem, you trust them a little bit that they can pick a reasonable problem for you to solve. So it's a little bit of give and take. And you're not given much, by the way. And the reason I say you're not given much, you do have to understand the problem to solve it well. But as soon as you start on solution discovery, which is the heart of the job, as soon as you put that solution, a prototype, in front of the user, you will be verifying, validating the problem. If the problem is not really a problem, you will see it right there. So it's not like you're giving up totally. You are still there. This is a choice. The reason this is important, partly political, but partly too many product teams, they don't pace their time. And I kind of blame, I shouldn't do this, but the truth is, like, if the world would switch from safe to double diamond, I would be thrilled. But double diamond is not so great. It's a too heavy process. It's process people looking at product discovery and trying to, turn it into a process. And unfortunately, and it's not the worst in the world, don't get me wrong, but one of the things it unfortunately does is it leaves the impression to the product team, especially the designers, that half the time goes to problem discovery and half the time goes to solution discovery, which couldn't be further from the truth. If you need 4 weeks to really come up with a good solution, you're going to need probably 3.5 of those weeks on the solution. No problem. We can validate a problem very quickly. And if you trust the stakeholder, you don't even have to do much of that. But my favorite VC in the world right now is Ben Horowitz. I worked with him in Netscape. He's a brilliant product thinker. And he likes to say, look, this is what's hard about product that not enough people understand. Too much of all this theory and process and stuff. He likes to say, look, your job as a product team is to create a product that your customers believe is on the order of 10 times better than the alternatives out there. It's as simple as that. If you do that, you got Canva, you've got Slack, you've got Salesforce.com back when, So it was amazingly like that, at the beginning. That's what we do in product. That people are not buying the problem, they're buying your solution. If your solution is not dramatically better than the alternatives, you lose. This is the part enough product people don't get. And yes, when you study the problem, you get deeper insights into what your solution could do, but it doesn't take much to actually get going, and your iterations you're going to need to do are on the solution. So you need to budget your time, because no matter what you do, I don't care how on board your CEO is, as soon as you start working on the problem, the clock starts ticking. And at a certain point they're like, okay, enough messing around. And now I want to date again. So you need to pace yourself. Most of your time needs to be on the solution. That's prototyping, testing, and when you get evidence that you believe you've got a solution that's valuable, usable, feasible, viable, you build it, test it, ship it. So everybody, that's the game. So you need to make sure you've got the time for that. Something happens kind of cool once you've done that a few times and you've delivered solutions that really do deliver results. Your stakeholders start thinking of you differently. You are no longer order taker, feature team. You are now a true partner, the kind of partner they've always wished for, that they could help them really succeed in the business. This is like magical. I've seen this happen in so many companies when that switch is flipped and they see you as a true partner. Now, if you go to them and say, by the way, last week when we were testing that new capability, I want you to come along next week because we are seeing a real opportunity and maybe we should pursue this problem. They're like, yeah, I mean, awesome. That whole mindset, you can say that now because you've earned that. And the amazing thing that happens once you've done this with a number of teams, both solutions and identify these new opportunities, now you can have that discussion around the first topic, which was maybe we could actually help with strategy. And at this point, you're doing pretty good. All right, I mean, I realize that's a little bit of politics, but honestly, this could make all the difference. Okay, so, yeah, let's just, you know the book. So I didn't mention Martina's book, Loved, which is all about product marketing. But yeah, if your company is, you know, the truth is, like I said, if you're a startup, you know, the book is not really for you. I hope you just start working this way. It's not usually that hard. I'm not exaggerating. When I go, most of my work is with startups. And if a startup is not already working this way, it usually takes less than 2 weeks. To me, it's 100 people or less. If it's 100 people or less, 2 weeks, we can get that company working like this. It's not hard. You get to keep people in the room together. You talk about this stuff, they're fine. On the other hand, if it's a medium or large company, thousands of people, we're talking 2 to 3 years. And why is it 2 to 3 years? Because it's pilot teams and more pilot teams and a more set of teams and a business unit. It's not like they get results right away, but it's progressive through a company. That takes years. And that is assuming they stay focused on that topic. So if you're in a larger company, yeah, that's what Transformed is for, and I hope it helps you. I hope if you do that and it goes, well, anyway, it goes, let me know, email me, which is the most important thing right here. There's my email. We will do some questions, but if you have a question that you can't get asked, get through the time, whatever we have, then feel free to email me. Anyway, I hope that was useful. Thank you. Thank you.
Just a reminder for those who are watching remote, just on Slido, the code is Marty. If you're Australian, it's Marty. Okay. All right. So we've got one here. It's not going to work unless you're a coffee drinker, Marty, but Aussies want to know what you think of our coffee.
Oh, no, I absolutely love it. A little story. Well, I won't waste the time with it. I love the coffee. Full stop. Oh, the question is, with generative AI, will we need PMs anymore? Of course, this is a really tough question. I should say that I teamed up with one of the top product leaders at Google on generative AI, Marilee Nika, and we jointly wrote an article called AI Product Management that has been quite popular, and I would encourage you to look at that because this is a very big question. I would say, of course, that first of all, the biggest impact on the product teams is already engineers. So far, very good way. I mean, if you haven't followed it, it's been very impressive. And I'm very bullish on that. It's also starting to impact designers in a positive way, although some designers are already getting laid off that are just graphic designers. So it's working its way up. Product management is tough because you've got product owners, which I think have a big target on their back. I already shared that. You have feature team product managers, and you have empowered team product managers. Those sort of 3 buckets. A product owner I've already been asked to look at 2 different products that basically automate what a product owner does. I don't know, I think it's just a matter of time. Because there's not a lot of beef there. It's an administrative job. The harder question is how much of a feature team product manager job is going to be disrupted that way. I do think project management will be significantly impacted. I don't think that'll totally displace it, but I'm worried about that. On the other hand, empowered product team, product managers, they are already getting more on their shoulders, not less, because especially about the viability risk. Remember, it's value and viability. The value is always the same, basically. We have to make sure that generative AI in our product actually makes it really better, not just marketing better, right? But the harder question is, how does it impact, for example, ethics, legal, biases in the data? That's falls on the shoulder of the product manager. And the product managers, we talked about viability, is sort of a next level responsibility on viability. So I think that will be, in one sense, it's job security. But the other sense is I think it's going to be a harder job. Now, that doesn't impact everybody, of course, but products that are AI-powered products. The other thing that both Marilee and I really believe is that it's a lot like, 10 years ago, we talked about mobile product managers. These were the product managers doing mobile and then occasional. Now, most product managers are expected to be capable of designing, working on a mobile experience. We think the same is true with generative AI. That today, it's a select few, relatively speaking. Going forward, it'll be table stakes. Okay. Oh, anybody have a question? I'll just repeat it for those that are out. Does anybody have a question? There's one. Yes, in the back there.
So everyone that comes and talks at these things with this question. I work in a product space with physical products.
Yeah.
Now, all of these things are connected to software, so there's the ability for a lot of AI and a lot of iteration to happen on those components. But have you seen any involved work in companies that are building physical products that have to be manufactured at lead times and compliance and all these things?
Okay, yeah, let me repeat the question for those who might not have heard it. It's actually an awesome question. It's about physical products. How much of this applies to physical products? Now, of course, the truth is there's a couple kinds of physical products here. There's tech-powered physical products like an iPhone. And then there's plastic products, say, like a coffee cup. Sorry, I didn't hear that. Say.
Somebody somewhere makes an injection mold that stands rubber dog food.
Got it. Thank you. Got it. Yeah. So the point is there are these just pure physical products. Well, I think the more interesting question is on tech-powered physical products, but I'll answer both. First of all, for those companies that are building just purely physical products, like materials, I keep hearing the same thing. 3D printers are their new prototyping tool, and it's revolutionized this ability. There is an awesome video that I found just recently. I shared it on LinkedIn, and I've been showing it to teams by, is it Roger Dyson? Roger? What's his first name? James Dyson. Thank you. Thank you. And that's James Dyson, the guy that does like vacuum cleaners. And he did this amazing quick interview on basically how they do the product model. One of the reasons I love it is it's all about, this is what he says constantly. There are problems to solve everywhere. There are products that break too quickly. There are products that are environmentally too expensive. There are products that take too much energy. There are products that don't solve the problem well. They see opportunities everywhere. And their biggest challenge is focusing on which ones to chase. And they love to solve those problems. And they talk about, I don't know how much, they didn't say this in the video, but I had read this in a biography, 7,000 prototypes for the vacuum. Now, it was also explained to me that WD-40, the oil spray, I just learned yesterday that the reason it's called WD-40 is because the chemist, that was the 40th prototype of the spray that actually worked. And so he called it WD-40, and I grew up my entire life just thinking, yeah, that's what you're supposed to use. And it is. But that's non-tech product. Now, tech-powered products, even more exciting. of all the companies I've ever been in, Apple does more prototypes than anybody I've ever seen. Why? Because they primarily do hardware. And the thing about hardware is they have all the same risks, but the consequences are much higher. If you mess up with a device, it is a much bigger deal. So like a Tesla, if you mess up, Tesla's actually leaned into this more, and they are making major changes to the car, the components of car constantly. It's remarkable, and it's totally the opposite of the rest of the car industry. So, but anyway, the point is, if you do this, absolutely. But like I said, it looks differently on a device than it looks on pure software. The experiments are happening, but they have to happen before you decide to go to manufacturing, not after. So that's why they do so many prototypes. Tesla, yeah, you talk about them. They're actually, despite Elon Musk, they are incredible company on how they build. Another one that's amazing is Rivian, if you haven't seen them. I don't know if they're shipping here, but they are equally impressive. Oh, they do. Great. Okay, any other questions? Sure.
What story are we telling ourselves that's holding back the product discipline?
The question is, what story are we telling ourselves that is holding back the product discipline? I don't know how many of you had a chance to hear or see one of my partners, Christian Idiotti. Christian is the guy right in the middle. Christian is probably the most gifted coach I've ever met. He is absolutely remarkable. But he started a podcast, because he wanted to, but just very specialized. It's what he wanted to do was speak to product leaders and product coaches. And he wanted to talk about coaching. The reason we include product leaders is the primary responsibility of a product leader is to coach their people. And the very first topic he wanted to, and he basically is interviewing each of us on different topics. And he started with me, and the first topic he wanted was basically this question. He wanted to talk about what's the biggest blocker out there to people improving their situation. And our answer was agency, coaching agency. So the way to frame it is, the question was framed, what's the biggest story we're telling ourselves that is getting in the way? When the person has lack of agency, the way they tell the story is, I'm stuck in a crappy company and there's nothing I can do. And don't get me wrong, the company might have lots of problems, this is all common, but are there things that you as an individual can do? People with high levels of agency believe they can improve that. And I believe they do improve that. They can't do everything they want to do, but even product leaders can't do everything. Even CEOs can't do everything. But sense of agency is so important. There are people I've met that just believe they either can't change it or don't deserve to be in a better situation. It's very sad to me. But I think that's the most important story, is to realize that you can improve your situation. It might not get better, you can improve your skills like we talked about. You can hopefully improve your current company. If not, you can improve your future company. You can help join a better company. And I do encourage, and one of the things that I love about what I do is I meet people all the time that tell me that they did exactly that. The individuals that did exactly that, they were able to raise their game and they got the job they were looking for. I actually had a couple people come up before this session and said exactly as much. So I love that. I just wish more people believed that. It's hard, I'm not going to really change minds just saying here, but one-on-one, that's what we were encouraging people to do. Managers to go one-on-one with the people they care about and make sure they understand how much agency they really have. Any questions in the group? Yes.
Say you're in high sales
all of a sudden responsible for coaching. What's the advice you give that person on that first day?
Oh, I love this question. The question was, you're an individual contributor, and congratulations, you show up, you've just been promoted. And now you're a product leader, and you're responsible for coaching. Maybe, I'm assuming in the scenario here, the person wasn't lucky enough to get coaching their whole individual contributor career, or they would probably know what to do. So let's say their manager didn't really care that much about them, and now they've got a field promotion, we call it. You're like, we need you. So that is a very explicit goal that I wanted to answer with the book Empowered. I'm not trying to sell books, I'm just, because everything in fact, everything I'm about to say, the articles are on for free on the website, so you don't have to buy the book. But what I wanted in the book, so I got a group, of course I publish online drafts of articles, but before anybody sees those things, I had a group of 6 product leaders that were in this situation. They didn't have the benefit of a manager that really taught them this. So they were all trying to learn on the job. They were exactly who I was writing that book for. Somebody who's in the role, but never done it before. And the goal was to give them a year's worth of coaching content so that once a week, they would be able to do, a one-on-one with each of their people once a week. They would have content for a year. And the biggest section in that book is coaching. And it's broken into coaching all these different topics, like coaching how you run a meeting, coaching how you make a decision, coaching how you assess risk, coaching how you test your product ideas, coaching all of these different things. There are so many things we coach. Coaching agency. Another thing we talk about is coaching imposter syndrome. There's so many great topics. And the idea was if the book could give the person a year's worth of one-on-ones on coaching, that at the end of the year, that leader would have learned quite a bit about coaching and their people would have benefited from a year of coaching. And it wasn't until we had that we released the book. So, and all those, if you just go, in fact, you can just Google SVPG coaching series, and you'll get an article that links to all those coaching topics. And I'd encourage you to do it and pick your own favorite topics, for your stuff. Great question.
One more from online and then maybe out of time. So tech debt. How do you prioritize that in the product operating model?
Boy, what a one to end on. Talk about a downer. Yeah. The question was tech debts. What do you do about tech debt? Yeah, how do you deal with tech debt? And of course, tech debt kills companies. So this is a deadly serious topic. Unfortunately, it's a very big topic that also doesn't have a quick answer because it generally takes a couple years to dig out of this hole. But what we can, I think, talk about is fundamentally what we need to do is make sure our engineering counterparts know that they not only can, but must staff and the tech debt work, the replatforming work. They must do that. What you do at all costs to avoid is getting to the point where it's too late, there is no choice. Essentially, the business has to either shut down or stop taking care of new stuff and just replatform. Because many companies, that's what they don't survive. The hope for 4 to 5 months turns into a year and a half. So we really want to avoid that. The question was framed in how do you prioritize it? The answer is you don't. It is not something, in fact, I tell this, and I make no secret about this. I tell because I work with CTOs and CPOs, and I've done both jobs. The CTO, I tell, don't even ask the product people. Because you're the one, by the way, that's fired if you don't do this. You don't have to ask. Don't make the mistake of asking. Because you're putting the product person in a very difficult situation. Like what do they say? if I give the engineering leader what he or she wants, then maybe we're going to not serve the business. And really, I've got all this pressure from the stakeholders, so maybe we can go another year. That's the wrong question. So it's not even an option. Product managers don't prioritize this. You're definitely in trouble if you're at that level at every team. It's not going to happen. So it's an allocation. Now, the head of product and the head of technology do have a discussion normally about how serious is this? Does this need to be, and a minimum is typically 20%. In other words, for every 100 engineers, 20 of them are dedicated to tech debt. Now, that can be done as a dedicated group of people, kind of like a SWAT force just on tech debt, or sometimes it's like one person in each team embedded. Sometimes it's every fourth or fifth sprint. There's a lot of ways to do it. But one way or another, engineers get 20% minimum. The maximum is usually 50%. 50% is dire. I mean, that's dire. That means like half the capacity of your company is dedicated to trying to re-platform, and the other half is trying very hard to do a small number of things that can move the needle for the company. It is pretty desperate. There are people that I can recommend that specialize in trying to save your company if this happens. That's what they do. They sort of drop in and look at your architecture and try to help you get things. They don't do the work for you, but they'll tell you what's going to break first. And so I can do that, but it's brutal. The main thing, like I said, is don't leave it to the product teams or the product management to prioritize. That is your engineering leader's job. Not a fun topic. Can't you give it one more question? It's a little less, yes, how about, do it.
Hi, thanks, Marty. I think it's fair to say over the last few years, given economic conditions in technology, there's a bit of a new wave of utilitarianism where the means to an end is sometimes accepted. And I fully agree with your attitude towards outcomes over outputs. But when you're a product manager in a position where you're empowered with the ability to have a say over the viability of the product, how can we ensure that we can stand up for the values and the rights of our users, the values and the rights of society more broadly, when we know it's best for the medium-term viability of our product, particularly in the latest wave of generative AI?
Okay, that's a great question. I love that question. Let me make sure everybody heard it. And it's not just generative AI. I could point to too many problems, because even before generative AI. But the question is about, let's say you're a product manager and you are genuinely concerned about the viability of the product, as you should be. And as you hopefully know, viability includes ethics. And I'm reframing a little bit. What do you do when you realize that something you may be asked to do, or maybe even you believe should be done, but you see that there are some unintended consequences, undesirable consequences, that either for society, for the environment, children, whatever, what do you do? And the reason this is so relevant is because most of the time, this is not intentional. I know a few companies that I will not work with because I don't believe it's unintentional. I think these are evil CEOs, and a lot of the crypto stuff just got taken over by that. So I'm not excited about that. Now, I'm not talking about that, though. I'm talking about good intention teams and people, and they're trying to help, but often remarkably high percentage. First people to see the issue brewing is the product team. Literally, because what are they doing? They're prototyping a solution, they're putting it in front of users, and they're evaluating what's going on qualitatively, quantitatively. And sometimes they are the very first ones that see, okay, well, this would not be a good thing if like children started doing this with it. One of the things we don't do enough about, in my opinion, is worry about back. And like we realize and this is one of the problems with crypto, is there are bad actors. Like, this is a dream, technology for bad actors. If people were good actors, then we would have a great time. That's not the issue, but it's the bad actors that's causing real harm. So when the product, what do you do though? Let's say you're on the front lines, you're doing product discovery, and you find you're worried about. First of all, when an individual, it is usually sort of, we say, beyond their pay grade. They need to kind of get some help. Airbnb was one of the very first companies to have a chief ethics officer. Wonderful guy named Chestnut, who's just a great-hearted, but a former lawyer and prosecutor, just worried about protecting people. And the teams were taught, go to him. He will help you figure this out. Is this a problem? What should be done? Is it even legal, or is there something we should do? Is there somebody we should call in law enforcement to help? What is it? I wish more companies had a chief ethics officer. I hope that sort of takes off. It's one of those, it actually is easier for the product team if there is a stakeholder like that. The lawyer, we always know there's some sort of legal counsel. We can go to the salesperson, but who do you go to with ethics things? But that's sometimes what happens. I do coach. I talk individual contributors, go to their product. Obviously, if it's blatant, like this is violating anti-laundering law, there's not really a discussion. It's not. You just have to find a difference, because otherwise the company is in trouble. So that's not it. This is more, we're talking gray areas, things that might be bad. This could be misused. And so we want to make sure we're not causing unintended consequences. So go back, or at least your manager, and say, here's what I'm a little concerned of. And get some help. Because this might, in fact, it will probably turn into a discussion with the CEO and others. Wow, what is we need to learn more about this. How big is this of a risk? Are there other ways we can mitigate it? They're probably going to call for some legal on what they should do. But I do want to encourage you to raise the flag. I mean, that's at the minimum, that's our ethical obligation, is to raise that. And of course, if I would strongly, and by the way, Rob wrote a book about ethics, and he says the same thing. I've ever told to do something that you believe is, illegal or unethical, if that's not a signal, you definitely don't. You don't want to do that. I hope nobody does that. But yeah, Silicon Valley does not have a great history on this, and I'm very sensitive to the topic. Anyway, so I'm glad you're looking at it. All right, that's great. I really appreciate everybody coming and packing in and all the other rooms and everything. I hope this was useful, and I hope I get back here to Brisbane and see you again.
Thanks also to everyone again for the weird seating procedures at the start and your patience. If you're in a remote watching location, feel free to come back down and join us for some network here till about 8:30. So hang out and have a good chat.
He's abandoning. We've been kind of. Let's just kind of. ProductTank to this point. This is our biggest event ever, if the RSVPs and the turn-ups are all calculated correctly. So 7 years of building a product community, a community that relies on each other, a community full of people that talk to each other in the good times and the bad. And Jace built it. So can we please give Jace a proper goodbye cheers? And I've got a card out there to sign as well, but cheers first. Thanks everyone. I can't believe I'm saying this, but there's a little bit of alcohol left. See you guys. All right, Katie.